Is Dale Spafford, and I'm the Regional Teacher Trainer and Academic Consultant for Macmillan Education here in Asia. Can I just check that you can all see me and hear me okay? Can you just let me know in the chat, please? Good afternoon, Michael. Hi, Sabjit. Alexi, hello. Hi from Thailand. Yep. Okay, lovely. So I'm based in Nonthaburi in Thailand, which is a province. Thank you, Palin. Which is a province just outside of Bangkok. Can you let me know where you are all coming from? So, Michael, you're from Esbak in Sapan Mai, not too far from me. We've got Chonburi, Chiang Mai. Oh, we've got lots of Thailand people in today. That's great. Bowen, where's Bowen at? Is that which part of which part of Asia is that? Songkla. I was in Songkla just last week. Very nice. Okay, we got Samaprakan. Hello from Cambodia. Welcome to all our Cambodian friends. We got anybody in from Indonesia? From Nong Khai up there in Nong Dao Loi. Welcome. Asok. Oh, not too far away in Asok, Richard. In Chonburi. Okay, born in Chonburi. All right, well, welcome everybody. This is the 5th episode of our ELTea time. Today, we are all about teaching skills. We're talking about teaching skills today. And the specific area of teaching skills, which is teaching large classes. Now, this is an area we get lots of feedback about from teachers. So when we do our training across the region, we ask teachers what their challenges are. And this is a big challenge for teachers, or it's a challenge that teachers often cite as being one of the major challenges, is teaching large classes. And certainly in my experience in various different environments of teaching, I've had to deal with large classes. It's something that comes up, something that doesn't ever go away. So this will be a good opportunity for us today in the next half an hour to grab a cup of tea, and we'll see what our lovely trainers are drinking in a moment. So we're going to grab a cup of tea, and we're going to share our experiences and ideas of how we manage large classes and those challenges that are included within a large class. So with me, I'm not going to do this on my own, of course. As you will know, if you've visited our ELTea times before, you will know we have 2 great trainers. But before I invite them in, actually, can you just put in the chat, let me know your average class size at the moment? About 20, Richard. That's pretty good, isn't it? That's a nice size. Anything lower than 20 is even better. Now, here we get Sabjit. We're getting into larger classes, aren't we? So I think it's worth defining what a large class is. And I think we're seeing lots of, 50 to 100 from Anatinuch. Anatinuch is a very large class. But yeah, maybe we can ask the trainers as well that they would define as being a large class. So why don't we bring in our lovely trainers for today? We've got Super and we've got John with us today. They're both coming in from China. 56, Gavin. Hiya, John. How are you today?
Very good. I don't think anyone can beat me. I had 126.
126. That's a lot. That is a lot.
In Nepal, yeah.
Yeah, and I think what we're thinking about here is the most I've ever taught was 56, say, from Gavin, is actually, yeah, I mean, a class, not just something that you do as a one-off, right? It's actually, you'll see that 126 every week or every day sometimes, John, right? So it's a class that you teach all the time. Super. Hi, Super. What's the largest class you've ever taught?
I have taught classes around maybe 100 to 120 students. Yeah, but it's not like a long-term course. It's quite like a short-term, like 10 times course. Yeah, but it's still very, very challenging.
That's a huge class. But anyway, it's good to know that both of our trainers today do have experience of teaching large classes. So hopefully we'll be able to share lots. And hopefully in the chat, you can also, 196 there, Zulfikar, I think, takes the win.
Can't do that.
But hopefully in the chat, you can also share your ideas to some of the things that we're going to discuss. So this is what we're going to look at today. So I think hopefully you can all see my agenda. So I'll leave that up for a second.
Looks good. Looks good.
Yeah.
All right, so there's going to look at a few key areas of teaching large classes. And before we get onto that, let's just refresh our throats with what we're drinking. So John, what are you drinking today?
What have I got in my Macmillan cup? I have some green tea.
Very
green
nice.
tea from a little corner shop next to my house here in Shanghai.
Excellent. And Super, what have you got today?
What a coincidence. Green tea from the office pantry.
Oh, lovely.
Cheers.
Who did you steal it from? And myself, I'm actually not drinking a tea today. I'm drinking an infusion. What's the difference? What's the difference between a tea and an infusion? Anyway, you don't have to answer, unless you know. But mine's an infusion of chamomile and honey.
Wow.
Yes.
Maybe that's what teachers need. Maybe that's the key strategy for teaching large classes is the tea or the beverage of choice.
And Richard, if I ever meet you, please say hi, and I'll make you a cup of chamomile and honey infusion. And Namdang and soda, that's a good Thai drink. Anyway, let's get on with things. So the first thing we're going to look at today is the challenges of large classes. All right. So when we talk about, as teachers, what's their biggest challenge? Often they will say large classes. So that's kind of like an overall term. So within that, what are the challenges? Super, do you want to start with some ideas of what are the challenges of a large class?
Sure. So for me, I think a large size class means the three things for me. The first thing is the gap gets bigger. So the gap among students and between student and the teacher. So physically and mentally, it's hard to get to know everybody. It's hard to be a very good, like, close group because there is a huge amount of students there. And also the gap in ability also gets wider as well. So you have more like mixed ability students in your class. Secondly, everything gets longer. So no matter you are like giving instructions or like setting up activities or getting people's attention, it all takes longer to do. So you need to be aware of the time. And lastly, the challenge is you, the teacher, as the teacher, you will have less control over the class. Yeah, you need to embrace that reality. You will need to let something go and get a loser hand over the class. So that's the three challenges. Yeah.
Okay. John, would you like to add to that?
Yep, I agree in terms of the teacher-student interaction. I mean, it's quite difficult, isn't it, to for all the individuals in the classroom to teach the individuals when you have a larger class. I echo Super about the classroom management issues, time, managing behavior, also preparation as well. You know, if you're making handouts for a large class, it takes time, doesn't it? And I also just want to add about kind of our approach or methodology. And often we feel quite restricted with large classes. Often we resort to a very more teacher-centered approach because it's safer, easier to control in terms of the classroom management, isn't it? But it's such a big challenge, isn't it? And it's such a typical feature, I think, of classes, government classes, in school classes in Thailand and Indonesia. I was in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Vietnam, teaching in the government school system, and it's just a typical feature which you have to deal with, really. And it's tiring. It's high energy. Assessment is incredibly difficult. You have a few on the front row who catch everything, are very good. Then you've got everyone in the back row who's not that interested and don't perform that well. So many things to think about, and tricky one.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think obviously all of those are valid points, and feel free to put into the chat any ideas, any challenges that you have as well. Let us know. I know some of you are talking about your classes today, which is nice. Um, One of the things that I've found difficult when teaching large classes, like you said, is those kids at the front and those kids at the back who might not pay attention, and that it's difficult sometimes to physically move within the class, right? To actually get to the back of the class to address those needs of the students in the back. I always found that as being an issue, and then within that comes the monitoring of the class as well. That's always a challenge, isn't it? If you've got so many so many in the classroom itself, and then not to mention the noise, the noise, how to manage the noise. Now, we're going to look at some strategies, aren't we, actually dealing with those challenges. So let's move on to that, because I think most teachers would like your advice really on, I think they know what their challenges are, but they want to know how to solve those challenges. So let's move on now to our strategies for large classes. All right. So with that in mind, you mentioned the gap being bigger, super, but had to build rapport, had to get to know your learners, takes longer, classroom management, preparation, all these challenges are great to hear. But how do you solve those challenges? So John, can you give us a strategy, an idea of how to solve some of those challenges?
Yeah, what to pick out? I think I'll come back to the restricted methodology, but just on the noise side, I saw a lovely idea recently where a teacher displays a noise chart on the board, or for example, with different levels of noise, and then for every activity, they will use like an arrow. They'll paste an arrow on how much noise they're allowed to use in that activity. So if it's like a big sort of group work activity and it's going to get too noisy, then they put it next to the kind of like a whisper or quiet to make sure they understand they have to be quiet for that. Um, and sometimes they may want them to be a little bit noisier and create that environment, and then they can move the arrow next to sort of the more noise. So it's like a increasing kind of level of noise, and you can choose for each activity. But going back to maybe the restricted methodology, and sometimes I mentioned we resort back to a very teacher-centered approach. Sometimes it's quite difficult, isn't it, to let go and do group work or manage group work. And I think for me, something that's helped me is something called cooperative learning, which I'm sure many of our teachers have heard about, which include things like think, pair, share type activities, or activities which involve an elbow partner, so someone who sits next to you, or maybe someone who sits in front of you, behind you. So it's still quite easy to pair up, isn't it, and group up even with big classes. So if you haven't heard of cooperative learning, there are so many lovely little routines out there, like think, pair, share, that can be used with large classes. So do search for those. Maybe Del, you can type there the cooperative learning routine. So that's one kind of area I would suggest. But at the same time, I wouldn't necessarily always think, oh, it's a large class, I cannot do group work. I think I would still approach the planning of the lesson with the same mindset as a small class. I was still trying to have the same amount of variety, similar type activities, but you just might have to be a little bit creative with that. And as Super mentioned, make sure you plan for taking longer with each activity. Make sure you put that into your lesson plan, because it always takes much longer, doesn't it?
Right.
In that sense. And like you said, Del, if you're going to do group activities, cooperative learning, make sure as a teacher you try and get around as well, make notes, try and have little individual contact points with students as well, write down mistakes, errors, and maybe they can do a group error correction later with all the mistakes or errors they've made at the end of the class, something like that.
Okay. Super, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think in terms of the challenges I mentioned earlier, I said like the gap, the distance between students and teachers are got bigger, the gap is bigger. So probably as the teacher, we need to step like proactively to get closer to the students, to build the community, to create an engaging environment from the early time of the semester or course. So it is worth like spending time to create that kind of interaction with the students. So maybe it takes a little bit creativity to connect with the students. For example, sometimes I will have like lunchtime with a few of the students from the class. Like you can have different lunch times with different small groups of students to get to them and talk to them, to know them a little bit more. And also you can do a lot of like get to know you activity as warm up at the beginning of your class, to get to know your students' interests, to get to know their preference. And also maybe it is worth to do a survey, like a questionnaire, to collect some information about your students, so you can design and plan your lesson depending on their like needs and their preference. So this is a way to build a community and to get connected with the students. And also, as John mentioned, we can still plan the lesson to do group work and pair work, but maybe it is good to form a good routine. Yeah, to make the routine like straightforward and simple to follow, and to do one maybe at the beginning and add one or two later in the class once they get used to the routine, so they will know, yeah, what is expected and what the group work and pair work is expected from them. And then when they get used to it, they will save time, we will save time on setting up it and yeah, doing the activity.
Yeah.
Okay,
Can,
yeah.
can I jump in there, Dale?
Please
Just
do,
add
John.
something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you to, yeah.
And I completely agree, actually, on nurturing the social connections. I think that is one of the most important things with large classes. How do you find out about these individuals? How you make sure they're all getting individual time? You're using their names equally, all that kind of stuff. And it's so important to try and find that opportunity. It's different for everyone. And if you've got time to, on campus, for example, and you can meet them for lunch, fantastic. If not, look for other ways of forming little online groups or chat groups. Make sure you give shout outs to students. If you do a survey, make sure you use that information and their names in the class as well, for example. And I couldn't agree more about routines, even more important, I think, for larger classes. How are we doing for time? Have we got time just to touch on a few other classroom management issues, strategies?
Yeah,
Have we got time?
sure. Keep going. Yeah, no. I've got a couple of specific examples that I wanted you to look at, but you go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a good question, actually. Yeah, Gavin said, would routines bore them? I think absolutely, to a point, Gavin. But I think you can have certain routines, can't you, at the start, at the end, maybe in the middle. But inside those standard structured routines, I think you can still have a lot of variety there.
Yeah.
I think what I try to do with large classes is to try to make the class seem smaller, in a sense, where you try and manage by smaller groups. So, for example, you might divide them into groups, have team captains, and get those captains to do a lot of the admin, the management for you with those groups. You can utilize lots of sort of teamwork type activities. If you wanted to, you could have groups, teams for one semester, and just keep it consistent, maybe with one group captain, and then change it. And that really helped me with sort of the management of, with the handouts and feedback, making sure everyone's on track, all that kind of stuff. And just keep going. If it doesn't work at the first, just keep going on that one. All right. Yeah, I think that's what I wanted just to extend there.
All right. Can I just jump in then with a couple of little features of classroom management and how you would some strategies to help with that? Because I think that's a big area, isn't it? Particularly, I mentioned before about noise and how you would get. So let me see if you can give me one quick fire idea of how to make a noisy class quiet. So give me one idea, Super. How would you do that? A noisy large class.
A noisy large class. Maybe we can use a quick like a tool of the traffic light. So the
Okay,
red light, the green light, and the yellow light as a
I like it.
signal,
A
yeah, to
visual.
indicate, yeah, the noise level. So whenever the noise level gets too high, you can put up the red light as a signal for the
Cool.
students to lower a little bit. Yeah.
I like it. Yeah, because John, you mentioned that giving them a chart to show them what the level of noise can be. But what I'm talking about is when the class is too noisy, and do you just shout, "Be quiet"? What do you do?
No. Yeah, Michael says ring a bell. I always had a little bell on my desk, probably the best way. Or if they're in groups and walking around, you don't disturb them too much by a loud sort of bell. Maybe give them like you have like a card with like a 1 minute warning. And as you're walking around, just make sure every group you're going around, just make sure they see the 1 minute warning. And then maybe some sort of signal or something at the end when time's up. But teachers are creative lot, and I'm sure the guys in the group here today have their own ways, bells, signals, but just don't shout, because you've got probably 8 hours of classes a day. You're gonna kill your voice, aren't you? So you look after
I always
yourselves.
found that noise meets noise. You know what I mean? Like fire meets fire. If you start being noisy yourself, the class just tends to get even noisier rather than quieter. And then one more just specific example, if you could please provide one, is instructions. Giving instructions to a large class is always a problem. How do you know that those kids at the back of the class understand the instructions? So what do you do how do you give instructions to large classes, and make sure that they all understand those instructions? Super. John, maybe you can begin this time, John, and then we'll come to Super.
Sure. I just thinking, in terms of instructions, don't start your It's the same for any class. Don't start your instructions until you've got everyone's attention, right? And that's where a good, useful signal will come in handy to let them know that they're going to be getting some kind of instruction. But make sure, even if you can't move the seats around, it's so important to have eye contact, isn't it, with all the students? Get eye contact with them. Make sure they can see you, look you in the eye. Make sure they're quiet before you even start to give the instructions, I think.
Cool.
And then even more important, to have very clear, simple instructions. If you're online teaching, making sure you have them written on a slide as well, even on a PowerPoint slide. If you're doing face-to-face, have them written down as well so they can refer back to them if they missed anything. They're going to miss them, aren't they? So, and you'll probably find 2 or 3 groups who just, don't know what to do, teacher. It's like, well, you weren't listening. Have a read, and then let me know if you have any questions. So
Cool.
back up, have them written down.
Super. Anything to add to that? It's pretty good advice, that, I thought.
Yes, so I have the idea to flip the classroom a little bit, which means you can record yourself about the giving instructions, or giving some demo. You can record yourself as a tutorial video, which you will send in advance, or play during the class. Even online classes, it will work quite good as well. So make sure you have a good demo and explanation, and you can give them to the students before the class or during the class as an example for the students to follow.
That's nice, and then just to broaden that, to model, isn't it? Just to make sure that students see lots of examples of what you want them to do, and new students as well. Great. So you mentioned there, Super, about online classes. So let's move on to our next talking point now, which is coping with large classes in remote teaching contexts. So this is obviously of its time. How'd you do it? How'd you cope with those large classes in an online context? I can't remember who went first last time.
John went first.
Okay, Super, you go first this time then.
Okay, so sometimes teachers feel a bit lost when it comes to online large class management, but actually it's still the same. The same principles will apply to a virtual classroom or face-to-face classroom. So we still need to remember the core principles. So for example, we need to create different spaces, like virtual spaces for students to do different things. Because in a normal, like face-to-face classroom, we will have time to chat with each other, like to do some side conversations, to ask questions. So during an online, like a big size class, we still need to create such kind of place for the students to share their opinions, talk to their peers, or see you like on a personal level, talk to the teacher. Yeah, so probably we can create different spaces, virtual spaces for students to do different things, to find the help, and also to communicate and collaborate. And also
Nice.
the teacher needs to be present as well in these different channels. Yeah, we need to voice ourselves in different channels to be present for the students, to let them know that how they can reach out to different students and teachers, how they can complete and achieve the task in that virtual like environment. So it is important to make sure you have that like foundation like formed for the students.
Mm.
Cool. Very
And
nice, Super. Yeah. John, would you like to elaborate on anything or add your own ideas?
Yeah, I just think it's even with online, it's even more important, isn't it? Going back to kind of the individual contact points with students and getting to know them. And for some teachers, maybe in this group today, may not have had a chance to even meet the students face to face. That they started the class online, because then had a chance to go back. So how do you get to know students? So in that sense, trying to share personal stories, or we call like self-disclosure, right? Self-disclosure. So, you might be able to see behind me a few photos, right, of friends and family. So bring your photos and information about you into the class as well, to start trying to sort of create that connection and that rapport. Yeah, picking up on what Super said about a culture, trying to develop a culture of communication and collaboration. Technically, with internets and stuff, I know it's sometimes very difficult, but trying to develop as much collaboration through, for example, breakout rooms. Yes, it's going to fail and not work sometimes, right? But try and have that culture, and just a little bit every class, build up, train them to be able to use it correctly. Find out what the issues are if they're not doing it well, and then jump on those issues and try and kind of train them as well to get better. You could either assess them as well, how well they do in their breakout rooms as well. What else? And I would say, again, it's a little bit tricky, but there's no reason why we can't. But just try and train them to be independent, a little bit more independent with their learning, will be really useful as well, won't it? I think. So each lesson, a little activity where they have to do an independent task or something, build up the skills that way as well, will be really helpful down the line, won't it? And I'm just thinking, as a last point, I've got here smaller, manageable segments, meaning smaller, manageable stages of a lesson, right? To keep them on track, to keep them interested. Don't let things drift too long. And plan well, basically, for that.
I think, Super, do you want to just add anything to that before I sort of summarize a little bit?
yes, I just want to also mention to like make use of the dynamics of the large like group of your students. Yeah, try to find some maybe classroom moderators from the students, so they can be your little assistants to us to help you out with some like technical issues, to answer some of the questions in the maybe discussion forum you created for students to post the questions. Yeah, and rotate these classroom moderators to
Yeah.
give some ownership to the students, for them to be responsible of the class, to be like a little helper to support each other during the online class. So I think it's also worth creating such kind of culture, yeah, to maybe also
Yeah.
make yourself life a little bit easier as well.
I really
I'm
like.
just
I
sorry.
really, really. Go on, John.
No, I'm just giggling. I'm giggling at Gavin's comment
Yes.
about kindergarten students,
Yeah.
and it's so tough, isn't it, with kindergarten students online, and like you said, like making lots of noises and stuff, and obviously parents become so important, don't they, or caregivers in that point, and
Yeah.
setting standards, expectation, rules, communicating that with parents as well, and it's tricky, isn't it?
If you're
With that
teaching
age.
kindergarten online, you really deserve a huge pat on the back, or probably a medal and something else to keep you keep you healthy. Really, it's a tough task.
Yeah, it just
Um,
had to be high energy, and lots of actions, lots of up and down and
yeah,
dancing and same stuff, but
yeah.
super tricky.
I was thinking about particularly with remote classes, and you mentioned this a little bit about. I think both of you mentioned it about responsibility and accountability, and I think, and John, you mentioned learner training, and yeah, I think it does take all of those, doesn't it? I really like the idea about having sort of classroom monitors, though, and they can then help, maybe even with that issue of that's been in the chat. I think I can't remember who mentioned it, but about turning the cameras on. Maricel, yeah, talked about how do you get them to turn the cameras on if they won't turn the cameras on. Now there might be other reasons, why they're not turning the cameras on. It might not. It might be because they don't want you to see their backgrounds and that kind of thing. But that comes from a needs analysis, which you talked about earlier, Super, and also from maybe having another student find out that reason. So if you have one student in charge of 5 students, you can ask that one student, why hasn't Poppy switched her camera on? Can you find out for me? And then that's an easier way and a more friendlier way for them to then say, because I don't want to, or whatever the reason is. All right, so that's great. Now let's move on to our last topic. We've got a few minutes left, and this is all about assessment with large classes. Now, I think we're looking face to face or online, depending on how you want to take this. You can go with it yourself. So, John, would you like to kick us off with assessment with online class? With large classes.
Yeah, sure. I guess I kind of broke it down into some formative and summative assessment as well. And I think just very quickly on summative assessment, obviously if you've got a large class and if you're still kind of marking papers individually, that's going to take a long time. So I can't impress more than to say if you can use sort of modern day courses that have these online practice, all the assessments online and get marked automatically for the teacher. I can't impress more how important that would be in saving you time, particularly with the summative assessment. But I'd like to maybe sort of focus more on the formative, what we can do sort of ongoing, sort of from class to class, and just from simply getting round, if you're in a face-to-face sort of class, getting round with a notebook from group to group, noting things down and having some kind of activity, making it a little sort of fun quiz at the end to try and correct the errors from the class, for example, would be sort of one way. Get them to correct it themselves in their groups, right? It's good independent learning.
Yes.
And then again, if you can use a course or utilize techniques such as sort of peer self feedback, peer evaluation, it will depend very much on the age group and the maturity of your students. But there's no reason why not. These courses these days for young learners also have a lot of self evaluation and assessment. Just make sure you've got some kind of checklist or rubrics or something that they can check against, right? Would be an important thing. And last point, as Super mentioned, use surveys, use quizzes. These are great ways of collecting information, whether you're teaching online or face to face, and they're kind of fun as well, aren't they?
Cool. All right, thanks, John. Super. Have you got anything you'd like to add to what John's just said?
Yes. So as to the formative assessment, we can definitely also use some group assignments for large size class, because it's also a good way to create that kind of student interaction and collaboration. So as part of your assessment, you can use one group assignment like throughout the course, to ask them to work in small groups to contribute to a small project or an assignment, and also provide them with a simple rubric for them at the beginning to follow so they know what to expect. And also before you give them like the assessment to grade them, they can do a peer review in middle term to see like where they are and how they should progress in the next second like a term. So it is good to start the course with a group assignment and setting the expectations for the student at the beginning, and tell them how to do a group work and how they will be assessed at the end.
Yeah.
So this is another way of doing formative assessment.
Yeah. Anything final to add there, John, or
Yeah, I'm just thinking with a larger class, as we mentioned earlier, about trying to set up smaller groups to make the class seem smaller. So formative assessment can be done in group form as well, I would say, and giving them maybe little A, B, C, D cards. And even if they're online, this is something that could be done online as well, but asking MCQs, right, multiple choice questions about the lesson today at the end of the class, and they have to hold up if they think it's A, B,
That's
C,
nice.
or D. Likewise for true or false, they get a little bit of time in their group to discuss first. For online, I think that's still okay. A tick and a cross for true and false about stuff that they did in the class today. But just look for
thumbs
little
up, thumbs down.
opportunities. Thumbs up, thumbs down, little opportunities. And we've had so many questions that we're not going to have time for about speaking. And maybe I think we can pick up on speaking, can't we? And we can next time
I think,
as a whole.
I think, looking at the chat as well, John, going back to those questions, I made a note of a couple of questions, but I don't think we're going to have time to go through them, but they're very individual. And I think that's the thing with teaching large classes is there's a lot that goes on. And I think we mentioned at the start that this is a big area. This is a big topic, and a half an hour chat over tea hopefully will help. But it's certainly just a start, really. It's we're not going to be able to cover everything. And like I said, lots of individual questions that are very specific to different contexts as well. But I think you two have done a brilliant job to talk about those 4 areas that we looked at today.
Thanks, Dale.
I'm going to share in the chat now just an article which is from onestopenglish.com, which is all about teaching large classes. So make sure you click on that and have a read of that, maybe with a cup of tea tomorrow, and you can get some more ideas there of how to teach large classes. But thank you, Super, and thank you, John, for your insight and your experience and your sharing today. It's been great. So thank you all for attending, and it's goodbye from John.
It's goodbye from Super.
It's goodbye from Dale.
Thanks for stopping by, Asia.
Stay classy, Asia.
Have a super weekend. Oh, super night, not weekend.
It's nearly the weekend.
I wish it was.
Have a super night.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time.
See you next time, everybody.